Welcome, everyone, to today's discussion on how human-centered research and a carefully curated expert panel can transform retail strategy in the health and wellness space. We're talking leveraging a custom expert panel for a brand and retail strategy. The goal of this webinar is not only to share what we did, but to give professionals across research, marketing, and the retail ecosystem a practical and insightful look at what rigorous human-centered research actually produces and why it matters. And these are going to be core principles or strategies that your brand can implement. I'll briefly introduce our speakers, and then we'll move into the conversation with time for your question towards the end of the conversation. The very first speaker I'd like to introduce is Stephen McGhee, partner Tradewind Group. Stephen helps consumer brands translate complex consumer behavior into practical growth strategies with a focus on uncovering the why behind purchasing decisions and turning these insights into actionable solutions across innovation, retail, and brand experience. Hi, Stephen. Do you want to say hi to the audience?
Hey, thank you guys for having me, and peace. Thank you for all the work you put into this. Greatly appreciated.
All right. Thank you so much. We are most glad to have you here. The next speaker I would be introducing is Adam Dumont, OnlyQual Project Team Lead at itracks with nearly 20 years at itracks. He specializes in high integrity qualitative research and has led complex recruitment projects across multiple countries, languages as well, and ensuring the right people are always in the room. Hello, Adams. Do you want to say hi to the audience real quick?
Sure. Hi, everybody. Happy to be a part of this project and webinar. Looking forward to sharing some insights.
All right. Thank you so much, Adam. We are most glad to have you here. The very next speaker is Leon Bourner, Vice President, itracks. In getting to know Leon, he is an award-winning client development professional. Leon has spent years helping hundreds of brands realize their qualitative research goals and plays an integral role in shaping the strategic direction and evolution of itracks solution. Hi, Leon. Do you want to say hi to the audience real quick?
Yeah, welcome everybody. Appreciate you joining us and really excited to be able to be part of sharing Stephen and his client story today.
All right. Thank you so much. You can react by clapping with an emoji to, appreciate all of our speakers. Again, the conversation we're here for is leveraging a custom expert panel for a brand and retail insight. We're going to be delving deep into how ethnographic research and expert panels are shaping health and wellness retail strategy. And the first round is really going to focus on setting the scene, which is the business problem. And I'm going to direct this first question primarily to Stephen. So Stephen, set the stage for us without going into specifics about the client. What was the core business challenge that kicked off this project?
That's a great question. What I would say is our clients started out, like I think most of our clients, with a lot of information and a lot of internal hypotheses and a business challenge. And ultimately, big picture, we have seen health and wellness growing over the past 3 to 5 years, really starting with COVID and rapidly expanding. And what we had seen was really mindsets and consumer dialogue shifting a little bit more from reactive healthcare to really, I would say, everyday lifestyle optimization. And so, if you think about the way a lot of us potentially thought about our health was, hey, I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing until it's not working, and then I'm going to kind of make a shift. And I think whether it's technology or whether it's what's available to us now, each of us is probably thinking, gosh, I'm going to probably live a lot longer than I thought. And I want to be as healthy as I can be, and I want to be as optimized as I can be, right? Which is a great business opportunity for someone in the health and wellness space, right? But ultimately, I think the other big shift had been that consumers are shifting it a little bit more to kind of bigger picture goals. So if you think about things like, GLP-1s, as you think about even just the way folks are thinking about protein and some of those kinds of things, it's really kind of a big shift. And I think the challenge has been that in many cases, brands are kind of walking in that direction, but retailers were really doing the same thing. And so there hasn't really been a dramatic shift of what retailers were doing. And so really we felt like this opportunity was to understand how consumers think about health and wellness, and more importantly, understand, what we could do better to kind of create an in-store environment that would sort of meet them where they are, and sort of do for health and wellness a little bit of what we saw beauty do over the course of the last 10 years.
That's very interesting. Thanks for that, Stephen. And in still understanding the business problem context, like you mentioned, the health and wellness space is changing rapidly. The way consumers are shopping is different. The way they think about wellness is different. Their relationship with the retail aisle is nothing like we've seen years before. So what made this such a complex problem to crack, and why did it require the depth of research that it did?
I think it's a few things, right? One, we at Tradewind Group always kind of start with what we know, and so spend a lot of time initially onboarding with the client, doing internal stakeholder interviews, and really sort of understanding, hey, at our gut, what do we think this opportunity is? What's exciting about it? What's challenging about it? And I think one of the things that we've all been seeing is online's growing rapidly, and in some cases it's outpacing retail, right? So there was a time, I think we all can remember not too long ago, where the thought was maybe that Amazon's just going to be dropping things out of drones. We may never be back in a store again, right? And I think what we've all been noticing over the course of the last 24 to 36 months has been, actually retail isn't dying. It's having quite a revolution. And there's just a really big opportunity to make that more enjoyable and interesting, right? So I think that's one big piece was, okay, that's great. What's happening online, but how do we do something in store that's different? And I think that really gets to this idea around understanding that full consumer journey. So from the idea of maybe I'm going to try something different, or maybe I heard something an influencer recommended, or a friend at a gym recommended something new and different, to like, how do I actually get to that product? And so the real opportunity was, let's better understand what that looks like. And in doing that, let's think of ways that we could partner with retailers and brands to really create a better physical wellness experience in a way that online couldn't replicate, right? And ultimately, what we were seeing was, wellness consumers were evolving a little faster than the retail environment. So, even if you think about walking into your favorite retailer, once you walk into the protein section, if I could be honest, it still feels a little gym bro. It still feels a little bit, maybe not fully relevant to the way people are thinking of health today. And so what are things that we can do with our brands and our retail partners to really make that a little bit more personalized and, more importantly, exciting, right? Because ultimately we feel like something this important in our life should also be fun.
Yeah. Such a fascinating response. Thank you so much, Stephen, for that. I'm going to bring it to itracks real quick, and I'm going to pass the mic to Leon. So from itracks' perspective, what was your role? What was itracks' role coming into this project?
Yeah, thanks, Peace. We've been fortunate enough to work with Stephen and his team at the Tradewind Group for a number of years. And, over many studies, we found ourselves supporting their team, whether it be through custom recruiting, Adam and his team executing project management, and of course, providing the software environment for the qualitative data collection and analysis. I think really for us, the biggest role at the front end of this study was really authentically listening to Stephen and learning as much as we could about his clients' goals. Number one, to ensure that our recruiting was going to be on point and that we could, truly target those influencers and sort of those wellness leaders that they were looking for, and then also to help with the project execution. We'll talk a little bit more about that throughout the webinar today. But yeah, I mean, Stephen mentioned it earlier, just really listening and diving deep into the challenge that his client was facing, and similarly, that was our role at the front end, is to make sure that we were really listening and is understanding as deeply what was needed as possible.
Thank you so much, Leon. Before we move on to the next round, where I'm going to bring Adam on stage, I still have one more question for you, Leon. We're talking about leveraging a custom experts panel for brand and retail insights. And the case study here is how ethnographic research and experts panels are reshaping the health and wellness space. So at what point did the idea of a custom experts panel come onto the table?
Yeah, I mean, and really, this is a credit to Stephen's vision for the bigger picture of this client. It came out very early, in the very early conversations, and when we start thinking about conducting multi-phase qualitative research, one of the biggest challenges is maintaining that continuity and depth across each stage of the project. And that's where a custom recruited panel of experts becomes really valuable. Rather than recruiting a completely new audience for each phase of a study, a custom panel allows the client to re-engage time and time again with the same vetted participants over time. It affords us things like consistency in the feedback and allows our team to track how opinions, behaviors, and even decision-making behavior can evolve throughout the research journey. And one of the biggest advantages is the depth of insight that develops over those multiple engagements, right? In a traditional one-time interview, right, the participant may just be getting comfortable with the moderator and the topic of discussion by the end of the session. So, when experts return for future phases, conversations can become more strategic, more nuanced, and ultimately more actionable. And that's where, business leaders like Stephen can spend sort of less time reestablishing context and more time exploring deeper motivations, reactions, and even starting to uncover some emerging trends.
All right, thank you. I think Stephen and Leon have done a great job in setting context to what the business problem was. So we're really going to just head straight to the research approach, and I'm going to bring it to Stephen quickly. Stephen, there was a problem, a complex problem, which was a rapidly shifting category, and a brand needed answers immediately. So let's talk about how you decided to get to them, because the approach that was used was anything but conventional. So you deliberately chose a human-forward ethnographic approach at a time when many are leaning into AI and synthetic response. You in fact spent 250 hours with consumers across 3 to 4 months, across 3 distinct consumption contexts. Can you walk us through what that methodological decision was like?
Yeah, what I would say is I grew up when I first started my career as Procter & Gamble, and sort of the key mindset at that time was really, this idea around consumers boss. And so the whole concept was, let's get with consumers, let's see them in their homes, let's walk shelves with them, let's have these opportunities to not just, get answers to direct questions, but to, really use the power of observation. And what I found was really exciting was when I was kind of talking with Leon and Adam about the business challenge, this idea of using the itracks technology, right? Which is takes us in their homes, right? So we've got a client. Many of us are kind of based in different parts of the country. And so what's an opportunity for us to kind of leverage that opportunity to kind of get with consumers, that personal deep way, and said, gosh, this is a great way to do that. And, ultimately, all the work that we do is customized. And so this allowed us to say, we've got sort of a big question. It's not going to be easy to solve, and there's probably going to be different iterations. And so what would be a way that we could get sort of consistent consumer dialogue over a period of time? And so, 250 hours seems like a lot. If I ask clients to give me 250 hours, I probably wouldn't have a lot of clients, right? So what we did was we said, but what are the ways that we can consolidate, curate, grab those videos, those clips, leverage even opportunities for them to show us their social media and what they've learned and who they follow and how it actually gets served up on the screen. And that really gave us a voice in the room as the team continued to kind of identify, we thought some of our opportunities and challenges were. And so in a lot of ways, they were our North Star. And I think I would also just say, I think we're at a really unique time in the world right now where we're all more technology dependent than ever. And I think a lot of us are really seeking that human connection. And so we found that these consumers were even emailing us, hey, when is our next time to get together? When are we going to learn things together? And so I think they appreciated that. And that just gave us a very different and insightful way. When they were walking us through their home, there were certain products that were off in the cupboards, and there were other things that were out on the counter. And when they were talking about, what they were reflecting on or what's on, we had pictures of their desks. And if you can have a fitness product or a health and wellness product that's kind of sitting out, that tells you something. And that's something that I don't know that we would have gotten through a kind of a more traditional quantitative approach. And it's definitely not something that I think we would have been able to understand if we didn't have that direct consumer dialogue.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you so much, Stephen. And in fact, in your response, you had mentioned or referenced how itracks too was supportive in that process. So I'm going to bring it on to Adam real quick. The methodology, of course, included an in-home ethnography and pantry check. So for anyone in the audience who is not familiar with this approach, Adam, can you explain what that actually looks like in practice?
Sure. Yes. So, our methodologies here at itracks facilitated this custom panel and make dynamic projects like this possible, right? Where there's the need to conduct multiple phases of research over time, whether there's surveys, asynchronous homework, real-time interviews and groups. Our methodologies and tools put everything into one framework, organizing resources and saving time. So specifically, some of the methodologies such as the itracks project management tool, itracks Go, itracks Board, and itracks Real-Time were all put to use in the project here. It really empowers us to create this community of participants, giving us an area to house them and make it easy to communicate with them, work with them over a period of time, to facilitate all these different phases of research.
All right. Thank you for going as far as listing all those methodologies. I have a quick follow-up question, which is, what makes it flexible for participants? What's that process like?
Sure. Practically, we load the participants into our platform, and once they're in there, and we can communicate with them with the tools we have. We have text messaging, emailing, and we can move them between different kinds of activities very easily. Our itracks mobile app provides convenient, easy to access activities from anywhere at any time, so participants can participate from home or in store, interacting with the product on the shelves, like we did in this project. So it really allows researchers to collect that, in the moment photos, videos, audios, text-based feedback, and get the insights we're looking for.
All right, amazing. Thank you so much, Adam. So we have gone through the business context, understanding the problem, the project, and then the research methodology or the research approach that was used for the project. And before we head into building the custom experts panel, I just have one more question for Stephen, which is the fact that the team had incorporated social media and e-commerce listening. How did that layer complement the ethnographic work?
It's a great question. We hear so much about social media. And even if I think about us looking at our own, if I'm looking on Instagram or TikTok, et cetera, there's one thing to describe what you see, but also there's just so much stuff you scroll past that is ultimately informing that experience. And so what we loved about the technology was them being able to use the technology to actually kind of scroll through their social media feeds. In many cases, they did that over multiple days. And then we had opportunity to ask some questions. Why do you follow this person? How did you find out about them? Like, what kind of information and content, right? And what that started giving us was a couple things. Like, one, it really helped us understand the vernacular or words they use to describe health and fitness. It can be really challenging, I think, to think broader than your own category. And when people, over the course of the holidays, we're talking, one of the women was saying, well, I know kind of towards December, my clothes fit a little differently, and I'm starting to think about health and fitness, right? So it was very true, it was very authentic. And it was really, I think, really a cool experience to be able to see what that looked like. And I think it got us out of our particular category and got us to think about the fact that, yes, this is a section of the store, but that section of the store looks different in drug versus food, drug, mass versus, all these other different channels. And ultimately what they were trying to solve for was this idea around proactive fitness, and understanding the role we could play in there was, I think, critically important. In a lot of cases, what we heard was, I know that something cool came out and I'm going to try to find it. And that kind of transitioned into, us actually letting consumers go in stores, do these store visits. Could they find it? What else did they find? What were the cues they were looking for? Were these things on end caps? Were they comparing items? And so really being able to understand the way that worked allowed us to understand some of those tensions and opportunities. And what I think we saw was people love the discovery. They love the thrill of the hunt. And ultimately, what we needed to do was create an in-store experience that could pay that off, and kind of get with them where they were. And again, with that kind of consumer's boss mentality, I think it gave us a lot of really cool and different insights that if we hadn't have done that more deep ethnographic approach, we might have missed.
All right. Thank you so much, Stephen. And we're now delving straight into building the custom experts panel. So at this point, of course, the team had gotten the rich ethnographic data across 3 consumer contexts, and there is now a clear picture of the gap between where this brand was and where it needed to be. And then came the panel, which is really the centerpiece of what we want to dig into today. I'm going to pass the mic to Adams, right? So Adams, this wasn't a standard panel pulled from a database. It was a custom built group of fitness enthusiasts and health and wellness influencers. They were recruited, they were vetted specifically for this project. Can you tell us what it actually means? Who was on this panel? What was their profile? And how did you go about finding these people?
Sure, yeah. This is my favorite question to answer because, having the right participants is the foundation of the research. If we don't find the right participants, no matter how well designed the study is, the outcome's not going to be what we want, and the insights aren't going to be what we're looking for. So, yeah, having the right participants is the foundation on all research. So, using itracks vetting process. Anywhere a sample comes from, it's put through our workflows and it ensures high quality participants and high show rates. Getting a little more detailed, participants will first start through a screener survey where we ensure they qualify for the study, answering questions specific to the study, that they shop in certain categories of products that align with the segments that the client is looking to explore. And that helps us identify and create research profiles for our participants. Once we have those profiles and we have people through the screener, next we communicate with them with our tools via email or text message to obtain video and audio recordings for review and verification. Now, this is a very critical step because even though they've qualified for the study through screening, this gives us a chance to ensure the participants are authentic, articulate, technically proficient in being able to participate in research, but specifically, it lets researchers be selective, right? Really find the right participant. In this project, like we were able to identify experts in specific categories, whether it was feminine care, active nutrition, gut health products, really finding the right participants that we knew would have perspective to share in the study. So, yeah, having this screening and vetting process available in our tools also allows for very prompt timelines due to the seamless communication and consolidation of data in one place between participants, our vendors, our clients, and ourselves. So, I really enjoyed the recruitment for this project. It was fun.
All right. A quick follow-up, especially because you indeed enjoyed that process, right? Where does the sample come from? What size is the panel? What size is your panel or reach?
Sure. Yeah, I like this question too, actually, because our sample doesn't come from one specific place. It's really, a large variety of places. We have our own proprietary panel, which is small but strong. We source from other partners panels, client lists. We have a large network of custom recruiting teams that we work with. It makes it hard for me to give an exact size of our sample, only to say that our reach is very expansive, multinational, across general populations, or hard to reach business to business, medical recruits, and other niche audiences. So we pride ourselves on being resourceful. I like to say, if there is a way, we'll be able to find it. So.
All right. Thank you so much. Still on that conversation, right? I'm just going to have Leon add more points on that. And to reiterate, recruiting the right people into a qualitative panel is notoriously difficult. And Adams has indeed walked us through the vetting process, the recruitment process, but we still want to know what was the non-negotiable in terms of itracks video articulation and PM tools. What were those tools that were used primarily during this process, Leon?
Yeah, thanks, Peace. Adam's touched on it a little bit, but the reality is today, particularly in qualitative research, is that the incentives can be very attractive. And sometimes that will attract people to try and work their way into studies where perhaps they aren't exactly the right fit, right? So Adam touched on, screener is sort of the first layer of the process. But for us, what we always recommend to our clients and to partners like Stephen is to make that video articulation non-negotiable, right? It's one thing for me to go through a 5-question screener that identifies me as a viable candidate. It's a whole other thing for me to get on camera and say, the last time I was in a physical retail location looking at health and wellness products, here was my experience, here are the products I purchased, and here's what my total spend was, right? That way, Stephen and Adam can collaborate. They can review those videos and they can start grading me and they can say, Leon is an A+ candidate. Clearly he's technically proficient, great audio quality, no lag in his video. He seems to have a pretty good sense about, that part of his buying journey, etc. Versus, just trusting sort of what people check off on some drop downs or perhaps some multi-choice questions in a screener. So for us, we always recommend that to be non-negotiable. And then again, right embedded within our tools, like my daughter's 25. If I send her an email, I might get a response in 4 or 5 days. But if I text her, I'll hear back from her today, right? And so us being labeled in and being able to layer in that ability to text, SMS, and even connect with other direct messaging platforms to be able to get quicker responses to allow Stephen and his team to be agile throughout the process, we think is something that is really become a real strong benefit and something that allows us to further leverage Adam and his team's expertise.
One more question before I bring it straight to Stephen. How long did the recruitment take? What was the biggest challenge as well, especially for clients here who might want to know how long it would take to recruit participants for their projects?
I could speak to that. I think it was a couple weeks specifically for this project. And I think kind of adding on to what Leon just said, really making sure we have time to do that review. Finding participants in terms of the process of getting them through a screener and getting them from a sample source is all fairly quick. That review process to make sure people are the people we want and we're finding the right people reviewing those videos. Having a little bit extra time there, I think, is critical to really set the foundation of the research going forward.
All right. Thank you so much, Adam. And then we're going to have Stephen once more. From the client's strategic standpoint, why was a custom-built expert panel the right tool here versus, say, a standard consumer panel or a focus group?
I think that ultimately there were sort of two guiding kind of principles that the team had that really tied to why this was the right fit, right? So one was, we knew we had sort of a big challenge, and we knew we had a lot to learn. And it's not always possible to kind of get that all in kind of one magical group. And so we wanted to create an opportunity for us to be able to ask questions and sort of internalize what we learned and then come back and ask some follow-ups. And then relatedly, as the team was kind of going through this, we started with what do we know? What do we think the opportunities are? What's our category's role in that broader health and wellness set? What's working or not working out there? And then we started iterating, right? And I think iterating is the key word for this panel, right? Was as we iterated different ideas, should this category be adjacent to this category? What is the best way for us to use that kind of inspirational beauty idea? What would that look like, right? So, if you think about it as just an example, there was that Ulta kind of, they had that kind of Ulta in a Target kind of approach that we've all seen about and we've read the case studies, but being able to actually work and understand consumers walking through that and talking about why that mattered gave us ideas. And as we had internal or external conversations, there were follow-up questions. And not often are you able to say, you know what, that's great. Let me ask who we met with and gave us that idea. Let's understand what their reaction is to your question. That really just gave us a totally different level of depth and understanding. And that continuous engagement gave us, I think, a much more stronger ideas. And I think it really gave us something different than like what an isolated sort of research moment might have given us.
All right. Thank you so much, Stephen. Before we move on to the final segment, just want to say to the audience that if you have questions, you can just drop those questions in the Q&A segment and we'll pick them once we're done with the conversation. I'm going to pass the mic to Leon because there's just been a lot of discussion right now about how synthetic respondents and AI-generated consumer inputs are just going all around. What's your view on that trend in the context of this kind of work?
Oh gosh, Peace, that is the multi-million-dollar question these days, and could probably be its own webinar. I'll try and get to the heart of it, but cut me off if I get a little bit long-winded. But yeah, I mean, there's no question that AI and synthetic respondents and synthetic data are becoming major conversation points in the industry right now, and it's understandable. Companies are under incredible pressure to move faster, to manage costs, to generate insights more continuously than ever before. But in the context of complex, multi-phase qualitative research, I see AI as a very powerful enhancement tool, but not a replacement to human insight. Where AI is often useful is in improving efficiency and scalability in the research processes. It can help synthesize large volumes of data. It can help lead to identifying patterns, supporting some thematic analysis, and even start to generate some discussions, summaries, or perhaps help moderators with early stage discussion guide development. It's also useful for teams like Adam operationally, right? It can help to streamline some recruitment workflows, participant management, transcription, translation, insight retrieval and reports. So it can do things like helping to connect themes across multiple phases, perhaps faster than traditional manual analysis. But there's a very, very important distinction between simulating language and understanding lived experience. What human expertise provides, particularly in expert qualitative research like this, is context, emotion, contradiction, intuition, memory, and most importantly, lived experience and experiences. Human participants are shaped by things like organizational politics or personal risk or social pressures, culture, the incentives being provided, uncertainty, their own personal ambitions and emotions, right? So these human factors influence decision-making in ways that are often irrational, perhaps inconsistent, but ultimately deeply, deeply human. So, a synthetic respondent can generate statistically plausible answers based on patterns that it's seen, but it can't truly replicate what it feels like to be, for example, a hospital administrator who's under massive budget pressure, or an engineer that is having to balance different decisions when building an AI data center, or a consumer balancing emotional identity versus their own personal economic pressures, right? So, experts like Stephen, they can start to identify things like hesitation before an answer, contradiction between maybe what they had provided as a response on a screener or a previous ethnographic component to the study and what they later admit. Emotional reactions to an idea or concept that Stephen might present on a table, and starting to ultimately to like emerging trends that language in an LLM hasn't been exposed to yet. So, right, ultimately, we have to think about some of the biggest risks of optimizing for efficiency at the expense of human authenticity. And in qualitative research, authenticity is the product, right? So, that's where the nuance lives, that's where the tension lives, and ultimately that's where we believe the most valuable insights come from.
That's a whole lot of insights, Leon. Thank you so much for that. Like you mentioned, there's a very important distinction between simulating language and understanding lived experience. So while AI is useful in improving efficiency, human expertise is relevant. Thank you so much for that insight. And now to the next segment where we're going to talk about the insights. So from insights to the shelf, I'm going to pass the mic to Stephen, right? This project did not just end with the report. It went all the way through to an actual shelf design recommendation for a big box retailer. Do you want to walk us through that translation? How did you take everything you've heard, observed in store, and everything your expert panel told you, and then turn it into a tangible retail strategy?
Yes. So, what I would say is we sat down and we kind of looked across all the information we had, the hypotheses we had, the learnings that we developed throughout this, the input and direction we got to consumers on the panel when we shared ideas with them. And what we started to see, which was exciting, was we kind of started to get the head nod, a little the twinkle in the eye, where, I felt like we emotionally got to a point where they kind of like, oh, you get me. Like, you're listening to me. You're building in sort of what we've been saying. And ultimately, where we kind of got to as a team was, there are, let's just say 2 or 3 core shopping missions. And so, and by the way, you might not just come to the store with that one mission, right? You could be a mom who is looking for, a new product, let's just say for something new life stage develop, but you also might be there to quickly kind of get in and out for some medicine for unfortunately a kid who missed school, it's home and doesn't, they don't feel great, right? And so being able to understand those mindsets and those missions and the way they want to, and then kind of integrating that into kind of a refreshed design, I think was critically important. And what I would also say is, in some instances, they took us on totally different journeys than we would have expected, to kind of build off what Leon said, right? We had one person say, you know what I want my health and wellness to look like? I want it to look like the way I shop for drinks. And so let's go to kind of the soda aisle. Let's go to the water aisle. Let's go to the energy aisle. And let's talk about why I think that works for me. And it just gave us some really unique and different ideas that I don't think we would have come up with otherwise. It felt intuitive, and I think we landed in a place that the client felt great about, and I think consumers are going to be excited about.
Mm. All right. Would really like to hear from Adam as well on shop alongs, tech issues, and the processes. What inputs do you have to that, Adam?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, shop alongs certainly can provide some technical challenges. We often see bad store Wi-Fi or bad data signals. To mitigate that, we often arrange checks with participants beforehand. We'll actually have them go to the store beforehand, connect with them, do a little in-store test, make sure it works, and schedule them for a follow-up interview with a researcher. So when we have high-value participants, people that aren't easy to replace, or we've already fully vetted, we want to ensure the highest level of success rates for each interview. So having that expert panel, using our scheduling and communications tools that we have, really provides us that ease of arranging these checks and shop alongs so they're successful.
All right. Thank you so much, Adam. Sorry. So before we move on to my next question, I see that we have 2 questions from the audience. I would allow us to pick up one. So Craig is asking, he said, if I understand correctly, the expert panel was used to pressure test ideas the research team may have developed from the experience alongside consumers. Since learning from the grounded experience with the consumers was the goal. Sorry, I'll take that again. Since learning from the grounded experience with the consumer was the goal, did you find at all that the existing paradigm under which the experts operate created unintended tension? And context to that is pushback anchored in their own value on the way to innovate thinking around ideas that emerge from the consumers. I hope the speaker has got my question correctly. So do we want to have Stephen go for this? Stephen, do you want to give a shot at that? I can read it again if you want me to.
No, and I'm reading it now too. So thank you, Craig. What I would say is we really use the panel as kind of one of several sources of information or sources of truth as we kind of navigated that. And so there were opportunities where they might push on something. And so the question ultimately was, okay, do we feel like that's broadly true or is that unique to the individual, right? Because again, what we know to be true, even just based on our own experiences at retail, is there's never going to be that one magic bullet that we make a change and everybody loves it. So we absolutely had instances where people were really pushing on things. What I would say is the fact that we talked to them multiple times gave us an ability to not just have it be the way I might have seen it in kind of another world. So I'll give you the example. If I'd only talked with them one time and they had said, I want this, and I came back with a shelf design that was not that, I think they might have said, yeah, I don't really think that addresses like what I just told you, right? But because we talked to them multiple touch points, multiple folks, and by the way, they knew that we were talking to other folks as well. So while we might not have always had them together in a single group, they were aware of the fact that we were talking to others as well. That really helped mitigate that. And I think gave us stronger insights, but absolutely there were times where they may not have fully kind of agreed with the direction, but they understood the why. And I think ultimately the North Star for us was create a better in-store experience that drives discovery, that drives awareness, and ultimately allows you to kind of hit your broader health and wellness goals. And so I think that worked out really well for us in the end.
All right. Thank you so much, Stephen and Craig. I hope that provides the context to your question. The second ask that we can have either Leon or Adam handle this question. The person is saying, how do you handle fake participants? Have there been cases where someone attempted to scam the process?
I'll take that, Adam. Yeah, the short answer is yes, absolutely. Every day you can see the big smile on Adam's face. I'm smiling. I mentioned earlier, piece that the incentives are just so attractive now that people will try to find their way to study, and maybe sometimes they authentically believe they should qualify, right? So, the way that we handle it is that first layer of what we always sort of recommend to our clients as non-negotiable is that video articulation process. It's one thing for me to be able to work my way through a questionnaire and provide some answers to open ends, or again to like some multi-choice or things like that. It's a whole other thing, for me to be asked to be on camera. And we find that even just asking people to be on camera, that eliminates an awful lot of the people that, ought not to be in the study. But make no mistake about it, we get people on camera who still sort of try to get through the process. And again, whether it's sincere or insincere, but you can see when people are sort of reading a response off a secondary monitor or reading what appears to be a response generated by an LLM like ChatGPT or something like that. If we design that articulation question well, you can really get to the root of it. And that's where we start to grade them like A, B's, and C's. A, this person's a home run. We absolutely want to get them into the study. B's, maybe we need to revisit it with them. Maybe we need to get them on a quick call or send them another video question again to see about their ability to communicate about the topic at hand. And then C's, we sort of just remove them. But we're really proud of what this has done. Over the last 12 rolling months, Adam and his team have produced 94% show rates, which is incredible in qualitative research. Our client satisfaction trends around the same score with respondent quality. So, sorry, I get very passionate about this. It's exciting because we've had some really great results since we've started doing this. And it's been a while since we've been doing it, but short answer, yes. People try to get their way into studies they ought not to be on, and most certainly we have a way to deal with the questionnaires asked us, the audience members asked us fake respondents. So thank you for the question.
Piece, the only thing I would add to that is I was talking to my daughter about this, and she sort of said, so it's kind of like The Bachelor, but for consumer research. And I would say kinda. Right. I mean, we had this opportunity to kind of get to know these folks over time. And they're talking about a product and you're saying, gosh, can you show us that product? And it's like, well, I don't have the product. But, we really felt like we got to a steady state where we knew these folks. We saw all the products that are in their home. We saw what they were shopping for. And I think that level of sort of truth was just and fit for the project was ultimately what really made it fun.
All right. Thank you, Stephen, for that addition. And Adam, do you have anything to add before we move on to the next?
I mean, I think Leon really spoke to it all. Yeah, I don't have much to add other than that. I've seen a lot of it, and very happy that we've developed our methods to weed those people out, because in the past it was more of a problem, and now I don't really see it as much of a problem because we have our methods to clean our expert panels accordingly.
All right. That's a big shout out to the technology that supports that process then. My next question, again, to just reiterate that if you have more questions, you can log it on there. And it's a full circle question to all the speakers, looking at the full arc of the project from design to delivery. What are you most proud of about how this came together? Let's have Stephen go first.
I would just say it's rooted again in consumers, boss. And so we were ultimately able to kind of bring these consumers across multiple categories along this journey that we had. And what it really allowed, Tradewind Group and ultimately our client is, I would say is building conviction that the decisions we were making, the designs we were creating, and sort of the plan we had, were going to work, and they were going to help meet folks where they are, help them on this kind of broader health and wellness journey, and ultimately use what we learned in a way to kind of quickly bring leadership and quickly bring retailers up to speed on what we learned in a way that felt like a win. It's going to be a win for these consumers. We're excited about what the next months are going to bring as we kind of get closer to kind of this in-store idea that we're bringing to life. And we're excited for folks here and folks broadly to kind of be able to see what we came up with.
All right. Thank you so much, Stephen. And to Leon, from itracks perspective, right? I would have you answer that question first. And then I'll go on with my follow-up question. So what are you most proud of about how all of it came together?
Yeah, I think what I'm most proud of from itracks perspective is that, we were able to sit alongside with Stephen and his team. And as the project evolved and as they added in future phases, that we were able to keep up with the creativity of his design and the ambition of what they wanted to produce for their clients. I think that speaks volumes to Adam and his team and their ability to be responsive and, to assume first that it can be done, right? So that we can keep up with clients, even when they're dreaming big and imagining perhaps some design ideas that maybe even new to us, even after all these years in the business.
All right. And Adam?
Yeah, I'm just proud to know that I helped to lay the foundation for this research. Seeing the outcomes and the insights that were generated lets me know that foundation was strong, and that to me says, hey, I did a good job, and so that makes me proud. And yeah, it was great to be a part of.
All right, thank you. A question for Leon before we head straight to our closing questions. From itracks perspective, what does this end-to-end arc from panel curation to design input tells us about where expert panel research is heading? And it's only one question, right? Across all the work you're doing today, what's one consumer behavior shift that you think brands and retailers are still underestimating?
Yeah, I mean, the first part of the answer would be is, we've touched on sort of synthetic respondents. I think anybody that's in the market research space has seen some of the pressures on quantitative research and samples and big panels, right? Because, there's been some things in the last 12 years that I think makes consumers of research ask deeper questions sort of about the quality of what they're getting. And so, I think that this custom expert research panel that Stephen helped to design and Adam helped to execute, to me, is like a very surgical approach, right? So it's a ton of hours, but we're not talking hundreds and hundreds of people here, right? We're talking about really authentically understanding who it is that the client needs us to communicate with, and then how is it that we generate those relationships over time to be able to really get them to open up and share their lived experiences. So I think that would be sort of the first part of my answer. So is to really think of it more in a surgical manner.
All right. Thank you so much, Leon. And then Stephen, is there anything else you think retailers are still underestimated when it comes to the shift in consumer behavior?
What I would say is ultimately the way consumers are shopping, whether it's health and wellness, whether it's beauty, whether it's tech. I mean, we work with clients across all industries. They're moving, I would say, from more transactional decision making. I mean, if I think back to the way we used to do our purchase decision tree, it's I have a problem, I'm thinking about some solutions to the problem, and am I aware of the brand, and I'm closing, right? I think the reality situation is it's just so much more complicated. And I don't think retailers don't understand that. I just think it can be really challenging to understand how to solve that, how to account for that. And I think that our ability to kind of use this type of approach, whether it be this project or other projects we've done as well, unlocks that a bit. And I think that continuous learning is critical. And so I think this was a great opportunity. I'm excited to work with other brands and other folks to kind of bring similar learning to their categories as well.
Thank you, Stephen. What do you think separates brand and retailers that are evolving successfully from those struggling to keep pace, Stephen?
I think that oftentimes we get so stuck into our quarterly business planning and right now we're worried about oil prices and we're worried about how to stay in stock and it's like we used to call keeping the lights on. So having been on businesses for a long time, that's so important and that's such a challenge. The same thing for retailers too. I mean, they want brands to delight consumers, but they also need to make the bottom line work, right? To ultimately the shareholders. And so for me, I think it's just more about how do we evolve? How do we learn? How do we create these opportunities? And I think everybody, by kind of continuing to make consumers boss and focusing on delighting them, is going to end up in a great place. And that's one thing that businesses, brands, and retailers can all agree on is if the consumer wins, we win.
All right. Thank you so much, Stephen. I'm going to take one last question from the audience, and I would move on with my closing question for my speakers. So the ask is the software that Adam uses for recruiting available for other agencies? And if it's available, of course, how can it be accessed? Do we want to have Adam or Leon going for that question?
Yeah, I'd love to take that one piece. So absolutely, it is available both for a longer term commitment or by using it for a discrete project. Any of the tools that we've referenced today, whether that be for asynchronous research over time, sort of a diary or board study, the technology leverage to do the in-store shop-alongs or video interviews or focus groups, and then, our newest product in the marketplace, which, was really key to the execution of the studies, are new project management tools and suite of project execution and operational tasks within our PM tools. And, they're all available to, a sole practitioner to big enterprises. And, one of the great things for registering and attending this webinar today is, we intend to send out the recording of this. But also, any of our guests will get a link that will allow them to access a free trial of any of these software tools. There'll be a link that they could sign up and get introduced to them to see how they can leverage it to help them execute against their goals.
All right. Thank you so much, Leon. And finally, to my closing question, of course, we've talked about how 250 hours with consumers, a custom expert panel built from scratch, ethnography across 3 contexts, and research that shaped a retail house. So if a brand or an insight team is sitting in the audience today and they're about to kick off a major retail study, what's one thing you would want them to take away from this conversation into that work? Stephen?
I would say whether it's working with us or whether it's working directly with itracks, and we've got a great partnership here. I would just say opening, start with what you know. So we're to assess what I know, like identify the gaps. What are those big questions? What are the big tensions? What are the big challenges? And then ultimately, what are the questions that I would love to get answers to? And when you do something that's customized like this, it allows you to kind of create a learning plan, and then determine if the expert panel is the right way to do that. And in some cases, it might be a 90-minute one-on-one. I mean, there's all kinds of different solutions, but I think hearing from consumers and being able to kind of build that iterative approach is going to be the key to kind of to getting to a really good place that's consumer grounded and sort of business relevant.
All right, thank you so much, Stephen. Let's have Adam.
Sorry, maybe I can pass this one to Leon.
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to jump in. I referenced this sort of quote or philosophy earlier, but it is true because it's one of itracks' founding values, but and B, it's so important to the way that we approach work with clients like Stephen is assume first that it can be done, right? Don't think that you need to have sort of like off the shelf solution, right? Get into these really deep, nuanced conversations with your clients, and once you sort of really deeply understand their goals, let's sit down and talk about it, right? Because more often than not, we will find that path forward, and we will find a way, and we will do everything we can. So yeah, assume first that it can be done.
All right. Thank you so much, Leon, for that. Thank you to all our incredible speakers for all the insights you have shared. Of course, we've explored so many things from how a major study was designed and executed from the ground up using deep ethnography, in-home research, social and e-commerce listening, and ultimately a custom-built expert panel of fitness and health and wellness influencers to help shape the future of the health and wellness industry. We pride ourselves at itracks in having or holding conversations that continually shares insights that brands can take away and implement to scale up whatever it is they're doing. And we definitely have more of these conversations coming up. So if you want to be involved in every of those conversations, please do well to follow us on our socials. You find the link to our social page in the chat box. And yes, as long as you attended today's discussion and you RSVP'd, would be sharing with you the recording of this webinar, would also be putting together a blog post that you can access, read, and get more insights and practical guideline that you may need. Thank you so much for joining. See you at the very next webinar.